Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I'm your host, Joe Kuzma, and it's special because today I have, finally, a first-time guest host, but a guy who's all too familiar to anyone who's been on SteelCityUnderground.com over the last half year or so. Brian Roach, say hello to our listeners.
Hello, nation.
Man, and Brian is a unique individual, and I'm sure this is going to be a lot of fun. I've been trying to hook up with him for a long time, and if you hear a little bit of noise, it's because he's in the car right now, so hopefully Brian isn't going to get in any fits of road rage on his long excursion back home, I'm assuming.
There's no guarantee of that since I get to spend some time on the Jersey Turnpike.
So, the reason Brian's joining us today is, well, number one, I wanted Brian to join us. I've been trying to get Brian to join us for a very long time, and we've got to talk some playoff football here, some playoff situations for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously looking very good, not looking improbable at all with 2 games remaining. We have, and Brian's been playing with this ESPN whatever thing the other day, or all day long. The other day I was making fun of Eric Herman for all of the being a math nerd, as he said I called him, even though I didn't say it. Well, now I do. I have called you a math nerd officially, Eric. So live with that.
No, remember, Joe, he's the king of the nerds.
Oh, the king of the nerds. Well, that would assume that he does everything then. He's a chess club and everything like that. So, although I do enjoy chess, that's not to make fun of.
That's my guess.
So, 2 weeks left, and we're talking about all these different situations the Steelers can get into playoffs, and it looks very likely, of course, the number one thing here is just win. And I was poking some fun at this with Terry in the WTF podcast last week, because I think last week the Raiders had like 9 different ways they could clinch, and the number one way is to win. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But we're looking at you say the cup half full, I say the glass half full, I say it's fully full. The Steelers can still get the number 2 seed here. There's just a whole lot of mathematics and formulas that go into this.
Yeah, they can land anywhere from number 2 to completely out of the playoffs, depending on the scenario. But the easiest path for them, obviously, is just win. If they win, they're guaranteed no worse than the number 3 seed.
Yes, and that's currently because, just rattle off some standings here, just currently New England Patriots are number 1. Doesn't look like they're going to fall from that spot. They're 12-2.
They can't. In fact, I don't think. There's no scenario where they cannot be number 1.
That's correct. What?
That's not true. That's not true. The Raiders, if they lose out, if the Patriots were to lose out the rest of their games and the Raiders were to win out, then the Raiders would be number 1.
You know what? You're right. Even though they have the X, Y, and Z for the clinching a playoff berth, clinching a division title, clinching a first-round bye, man, it makes me so sick that they play in this division, even though the Steelers did lose to the Dolphins this year. I wish we could play the Dolphins and the Bills and the Jets all twice each year, and maybe we would never have any issues whatsoever. But as it stands, New England's number 1 overall, 12-2. We mentioned the Oakland Raiders, 11-3. They're the 2 seed. The Steelers sit pretty 1 game ahead of the Baltimore Ravens right now, with the big matchup coming on Christmas Day this Sunday at Heinz Field. So they're 9-5. The Ravens being 8-6. Pittsburgh beats them, obviously. The division is theirs. They will be, like you said, no worse than 3 seed. They'll host 1 home playoff game at the worst, a wild card weekend if they don't have the bye. And the Houston Texans are number 4 by virtue of leading they have the head-to-head against the Tennessee Titans right now, who are also 8-6. That team as well will host a home playoff game by virtue of being a division champion. And then it rounds out, we've got, who do we have here? We have the Kansas City Chiefs at 10-4, who actually have a better record than the Steelers. And that's who we're looking at as far as the 2 seed. We need a lot of help.
Yeah, there's no question about that. The first step of us getting the 2 seed will be if the Raiders lose this weekend to the Colts. And the Colts still have a mathematical chance of getting in the playoffs, but they can't lose another game, and they need a lot of help. But if they play the way they played last weekend, where they really just trashed the Minnesota Vikings, there's no reason to think they can't beat the Raiders, even though it's in Oakland.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? A lot of people, I actually picked the Titans over the Broncos too. And that's the other equation is the Raiders have to travel to Denver and play them. And I'd use the term that you also used in your article about the AFC West teams. They have to cannibalize each other, that being the Oakland Raiders, Kansas City Chiefs, Denver Broncos. It really looked like maybe 3 of those teams were going to make the playoffs. There's still a chance that can happen, but it's fairly clear one of those teams will definitely be a wild card team no matter how it shakes out. Ideally, we would want the Chiefs to be the division champion there. And this math, it really gets a little crazy, but it's a long shot. The Steelers do have a chance at the 2 seed, but more than likely it's looking like their best path is to just win out, see how everything else shakes out, get a home playoff game. Now, that is the most likely scenario where they sit right now, the 3 seed. And, of course, that's just beating the Ravens. You had scenario 2A, which I don't see very likely at all. The Steelers beat the Ravens and lose to the Browns.
If that happens, I think that we can officially say that, that very hot place has frozen over.
Yeah, and there's also that situation that if they were to lose to the Browns, and the only way I could really see that happening is they have the division kind of on lock. They don't care if they're the 3 or 4 seed. I kind of care in a situation of like, I mean, do they really care who they end up playing? I mean, you could see. I mean, I guess I would much rather see a situation where maybe Kansas City or Denver or somebody comes to Heinz Field as opposed to ever having to go there. Those are very hard places to play, of course. Arrowhead, especially this time of year, also very cold. But I don't know, man. The Texans winning out doesn't seem very likely. The Browns beating us doesn't seem very likely. But scenario 2B, of course, being the same with the 4th seed is if the Steelers lose to the Ravens, then beat the Browns. And that could be anywhere from the 4th seed all the way down to the 6th seed.
Yep. If they lose this Sunday, and let me stop myself from shuddering, they're not out. They need help at that point, in which point the Bengals would have to beat the Ravens for us to even get in. And if you're really talking about looking at a drop of water in a glass and saying it's full, if you think that's going to happen, because there's no way the Bengals are going to do their best to put us in the postseason.
Yeah. And you never say never, though, because the Bengals previously had owned the Ravens. Now, the Ravens beat them in their last matchup, but it was something, I think, like 6 in a row. Or it's almost as bad as how we've been losing to the Ravens. Is quite the opposite, where the Ravens just can't get over the hump with the Bengals, and they do have to play that game in Cincinnati. So
that's true. I mean, so if the Bengals had a reason to play, that's the only thing that caveat that makes me so hesitant on this, is that if it comes down to that Sunday and the Bengals are sitting there going, well, we generally own the Ravens, but if we beat them, the Steelers are going to win the division and go into the playoffs. Maybe we just won't even bother. I mean, can you imagine Vontaze Burfict or Pac-Man Jones sitting there and a Ravens receiver, say Perriman, gets open? Is Pac-Man really going to chase him down knowing that it doesn't make a bit of difference if he wins? and doing so might put the Steelers in the playoffs?
I don't know. I get the impression that the animosity between those teams is just as much as between the Bengals and the Steelers. It's probably like a catch-22, darned if you do, darned if you don't situation where, you know what, Vontaze Burfict and Pac-Man Jones and all those guys are such head cases as it is. It wouldn't take much, I think, to just trigger and set them. In fact, I mean, they could like literally go out there and probably commit murder on the field. They're that crazy. And I know
a little volatile.
Just a little bit. I mean, good Lord. I mean, the stuff that was going on last Sunday, Vontaze Burfict trying to take a cheap shot at Rosie Nix. They're trying to do things in the pile with Lev Bell as usual. And DeCastro got a little bit of, in the, I guess you would call it locker room justice, but it was out on the field. So on the field justice, gridiron justice, but I mean, he took a shot at him, and I think that may have been missed. It was very Cody Wallace-esque, maybe not as late after the play, but DeCastro definitely, they took note, and you notice how it happened just a few plays later, and I think we have like our little group chat that goes on during these games. I think I said immediately, retaliation for the Rosie Nix hit. Why would you want to go after Rosie Nix? You're going to take a cheap shot at somebody like that. I think you would take a cheap shot at Jesse James if it would be anybody off the ball.
Anybody else. I mean, look, I think that guy, Vontaze Burfict, will take a cheap shot at whoever is in front of him. I don't think he can restrain himself.
This is very true. So we're definitely, I think what we're looking at is we're looking at the division win. We're thinking a wild card is going to be difficult, but not out of the question, of course. And it's not unlike the Chiefs who maybe lay an egg, this late in the season. And another thing too is if Andy Reid has this all sewn up heading into week 17, it's not unlike him to sit all of his players and just take a breather. So I'm not sure exactly what's really on the line for him as well. They're going to go to San Diego. They're going to be playing in decent weather, so weather's not a factor there if somebody but it could be if guys are used to playing in the cold and then go out and they're playing in the heat now, pull a hamstring or something. I mean, it's very likely that he doesn't play Alex Smith, doesn't play Spencer Ware. Jeremy Macklin's been banged up. He might sit like a whole bunch of guys. He sat like 10 or 12 guys that one year when the Steelers needed all of these things to happen to get in the playoffs, and it just so happened it was not a we're going to talk about referees, Brian. A missed penalty.
I know, that's a bad topic.
Yeah, a missed penalty and a missed field goal, and they should have got a retry, and then the Chargers end up in the playoffs. And, of course, they beat the Bengals, too. I mean, surprise, surprise. Bengals do not win in the playoffs. I think that's the only thing that's sad about not seeing the Bengals in the playoff picture this year is just knowing that they would lose again. So, but a little bit of housekeeping here. We've re-signed Alhaj Shabazz to the practice squad. So that poor guy, tries to get an opportunity with the Texans, doesn't work out. Now he's back with the Steelers. I mean, good for him. I mean, he's a quality guy to have there in case of emergency. That's a little bit of a news update. And I think Terry. We said Terry would probably be happy about that, right?
Terry was happy about that. She couldn't believe nobody else picked him up. There we go. Hey, you got a little color there.
A little excitement. Vontaze must be on the loose.
The cops go running down the turnpike here. Luckily, they're not after me. But, she was surprised nobody else picked him up. And my thought was, well, first of all, it's very late in the year. And the bottom line is we do tend to get very attached to our practice squad players, but they're practice squad players for a reason. And, nobody wanted him.
Yeah.
It doesn't make him a bad player. It just means, he doesn't fit anybody else's scheme right now. And he might be, think of Ross Cockrell. The Bills gave up on him, and that looks like the biggest mistake they've made in a while. And at the same time, how much of it could be scheme, our style of defense, the right play. So maybe, he fits better with us than anybody else.
Yeah, and there are too many of these moves that happen this late in the year. for the reasons you said. I mean, you just can't pick up somebody and expect them to get entrenched in your system immediately. You know what I mean? You have to have something that's very similar styles. I mean, you could see basically you would see a move like this happen with maybe like the Patriots. You could probably do it with maybe a wide receiver. There's only so much you could do with certain routes. There's limited. You take a look at a guy like Justin Hunter, for example, that went up to the Bills, and he still wasn't seeing all that much playing time because he doesn't have the playbook down, and that was towards the beginning of the year. Unless you have a training camp, this is no joke. If you don't have a training camp in, you're not going to be very useful to a team. Look at Justin Gilbert. Justin Gilbert's still not getting on the field, and some of that is just because of all the guys that have been playing outstanding in the secondary right now. And I'll have Shabazz. His best chance at playing is if he gets signed and he's depth for special teams, which is very helpful. Special teams has been a little banged up. But speaking of that, speaking of the secondary, speaking of all these guys, Burt Lawton had tweeted out the Steelers team MVP will be announced next week. Says leading up to Week 17, so I could only assume that'll be on Tuesday or Wednesday maybe. Just a little bit of a bonus question. I'm going to put you on the hot seat right now, Brian. Who do you have as the team MVP? I'm going to guess it's the same guy that I have, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
To me, the actual team MVP in my mind is Lev Bell. And it's because he just changes the way that the offense works. I give strong consideration to Debo, to James Harrison, simply because, the guy is amazing. But if you take Lev Bell off the squad and they take AB out of the game, as they have been doing, we're in trouble. We're struggling because we don't have a great second choice beyond AB. And, Ladarius has started to become that guy, without a doubt. But in my mind, it's Lev Bell.
Yep, you hit the nail on the head. I think he stands head and shoulders above everyone else. Even though he's missed a few games, I think he's in Super Bowl MVP contention. We're definitely going to see what he does against the great Ravens run defense coming up this week. But already 1,146 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns. That's only in 11 games this season. And then he has also caught 72 passes for 601 yards on 90 targets, no less. And, of course, as I always say, he's the second best receiver on the Steelers because he is. The next guy, AB has caught 96. AB's on his way probably to about 120 catches or so. Lev Bell, 72 catches. The next guy, Eli Rogers, 38. And, of course, Eli missed some time, but even Jesse James, 33, Sammy Coates, 21, and then Green, 18. And then it makes you really wonder, D'Angelo Williams has 15 catches as well in relief of Bell. I think he's in contention for NFL. I might have said Super Bowl. Did I say Super Bowl MVP? I meant to say NFL MVP, but he could be Super Bowl MVP too. That's some wishful thinking. So,
I think yes, it's wishful thinking, but it's true. If he continues to have the kinds of games he's been having, because he doesn't need 100 yards on the ground every game. It's the combination of his unique abilities to catch the ball and be a receiver and also to run the way he runs that make him uniquely suited for our offense and really just helps drive it. And if he can have a decent game against the Ravens, which I don't think he did the first time around.
No, and you know what? I'll actually pull that up here in a second, but just hanging on all those words there, I mean, what else can you expect? I mean, Lev Bell has been incredible this year. I think everyone talking about franchise tag. I don't know. I don't see him being a guy that would hold out for money during camp. If it comes down to it, they will tag him, and then it's possible that after they tag him, he gets like a long-term deal, similar to what the Denver Broncos did this offseason with Von Miller, initially tagged. Yep. And I bet they're feeling good that they tagged him instead of Brock Osweiler. But yeah, the first game, they didn't really dedicate too much to the run. You had 14 carries by Bell for 32 yards. However, he was targeted 9 times in the past game. He had 6 for 38. Probably his worst, no doubt, his worst output of the year. I think a lot of that had to do with Ben being banged up, coming back from injury. So outside of that, the guy has been dynamite. We'll see what he does. Well, and of course, you know what? I mean, the Browns, we're probably expecting them to come into Heinz Field in the last week 0-15. I don't know if there's going to be a whole lot of reason for Bell to play. Some of the speculation is if there's it all depends on what happens with the Raiders, of course, because if there's a chance for the 2 seed. If there's not, I expect Tomlin, this is going to be like a preseason game. He's going to play guys for maybe a quarter, maybe a half, and then start pulling them and get some other guys in there, especially if there's not much on the line in that game.
I agree with that completely. I think if the 2 seed is there, if the Raiders lose this week, and there's a chance at the 2 seed, then you got to play to win that game. But if the Raiders beat the Colts and the 2 seed is off the table, and losing that game to the Browns really ends up meaning nothing because you're going to still be the AFC North champs and almost certainly get the number 3 seed, then I think you're right. You play it like a preseason game. You keep the starters a little active, maybe give them a quarter's worth of work, and then it's whoever's a live body.
Yep, it's going to be the D'Angelo Williams and Landry Jones show. Apparently, Mike Tomlin said in his press conference earlier, D'Angelo is going to be a go. He didn't like the way the field conditions were in Cincinnati, and they thought he had fluid in his knee. But from here on, he expects him to see some work. So we may see Bell a little limited going forward. I think he'll be used a lot against the Ravens, maybe not as much against the Browns. Could be an MVP candidate. We see the Steelers at worst maybe a 4 seed, at best a 2 seed, most likely a 3 seed. Brian, thanks for joining us today. Hey, do you have any type of shout-out that you want to give before we sign off?
I just want to say I love our secondary.
And that's it. I do too,
man. That's it.
I tweeted earlier, I said Sean Davis might be my new favorite player. The guy, what has he played?
My jersey's on the way.
Is it really? Awesome. I love the number 28 to begin with, and I think it was Mark Caboli that had tweeted out, and Davis became the starter. Now he's officially on the depth chart as the starter, as are Debo, Dupree, and I'm missing someone else. There was 4 guys there that were never officially. Maybe it was Hargrave. That are officially on the depth chart now as starters. They weren't, the notoriety wasn't there before, but 5 games, Davis starting, plays every snap in every single game, 299 straight snaps, just unbelievable. And he plays special teams too, so the guy's a workhorse, and he's only a rookie. And it's scary to think about that, but ever since he had maybe that unfortunate penalty trying to rip the ball from Jason Witten, he has been, I'm using the word again, dynamite, maybe the defensive MVP thus far, maybe Debo. So, Brian, thanks once again for joining us today.
All right, thanks for having me.
Absolutely no problem. And ladies and gentlemen, you can follow Brian on Twitter. I don't remember. Brian, what's your handle again? It's Cannon something. Always forget these.
Cannons don't thunder. Although the thunder is cut off.
Yeah, it's kind of like Steel City Underground. It's the same type of thing.
Yes.
You would think with, they give you 140 characters. They can't give you a little bit more for your handle, I guess. So, but... Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in, and once again, we'll be back. I'll be back on the air, hopefully with Terry with the WTF podcast coming up this week, and then, of course, later this week, we'll be previewing this big matchup with the Baltimore Ravens. Until next time, be safe, be good, and I will catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.